6 months later, I got a phone call that changed everything I thought I knew about my daughter-in-law. It was my son, and his voice was shaky in a way that immediately set off alarm bells. "Mom? Can you come over? We need to talk." I found them in their living room, sitting on opposite ends of the couch like strangers. My daughter-in-law looked smaller somehow, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. "What's wrong?" I asked, settling into the armchair across from them. My son glanced at his wife, then back at me. "Tell her," he said quietly. She took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I owe you an apology. I waited. The way I treated you, the things I did. It wasn't about you. It was about me. I don't understand." She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. "My mother died when I was 12. My father remarried a year later, and my stepmother spent the next 6 years trying to erase every trace of my mom from our lives." The words hung in the air between us. She threw away my mother's pictures, her jewelry, even her recipes. Said it wasn't healthy to live in the past. By the time I graduated high school, it was like my mom had never existed. I felt something shift in my chest, a recognition of old pain. When I met your son and saw how close you two were, how much he loved and respected you, I was terrified. Terrified of what? That you'd do to me what my stepmother did to my mom's memory. That you'd try to erase me the way I'd been erased. She finally looked up at me, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "So I decided to erase you first." The room was quiet except for the tick of the mantel clock. I convinced myself I was protecting my marriage, my future. But really, I was just a scared little girl trying to make sure no one could hurt me the way my stepmother had hurt me. My son reached over and took her hand. "She's been in therapy since the wedding, working through all of this." I stared at this woman who'd caused me so much pain, seeing her clearly for the first time. Not a villain or a manipulator, but a wounded child who'd grown up believing that love was a competition with only one winner. "I'm sorry," she said again. "I'm so sorry for everything." And here's the thing about forgiveness. Sometimes it comes like lightning, sudden and bright and impossible to ignore. "I forgive you," I said, and meant it. She started crying then, real tears that washed away months of careful masks and pretense. "I don't know how to be a daughter-in-law," she whispered. "I never had an example of how it's supposed to work." I moved to the couch and sat beside her, doing something I'd never thought I'd do. I put my arms around this woman who'd tried to erase me, and I held her while she cried. "It's not about erasing anyone," I told her gently. "There's room for all of us in his heart. There always has been." That night, we had our first real conversation. Not mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, but two women who'd both learned hard lessons about love and loss and the courage it takes to let people in. She told me about her mother, a teacher who died too young from cancer. I told her about my husband, and the long lonely years of raising my son alone. And slowly, carefully, we began to build something new. Not the instant bond of fairy tales, but the harder, more valuable connection of two people who'd chosen to trust despite their scars. Today, 3 years later, she calls me Mom. Not because she has to, but because she wants to. And when my granddaughter was born last spring, she asked if we could use my mother's name as her middle name. "For both grandmothers," she said, holding that perfect little baby. "The one who's here, and the one who's watching." I share this story not because I want sympathy or praise, but because I learned something important that changed how I see the world. Hurt people, but healed people can heal people too. My daughter-in-law thought she could hire me as a babysitter for 7 kids at her wedding, thought she could erase me from my own son's story. But I changed my plans, and in doing so, I didn't just reclaim my place in my family. I helped heal a broken girl who'd been carrying her pain for 20 years. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't about winning or losing. Sometimes they're about understanding that the person trying to hurt you is probably hurting worse than you are. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, fighting for your family means fighting for all of it. Even the parts that try to push you away. That's the truth I want to leave you with. Love isn't a competition. There's always room for more at the table, if you're brave enough to pull up another chair. And that truth, unlike wedding programs or legal documents, can never be erased. Thank you so much for watching this incredible journey of family, forgiveness, and finding your voice. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own family struggles, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that they matter, that their voice counts, that they're worth fighting for. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. We have more powerful stories of love, resilience, and second chances coming your way. Your support means the world to our community, and your comments and shares help these stories reach people who need them most. Tell us in the comments, have you ever had to fight for your place in your own family? How did you find the courage to stand up for yourself? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Until next time, remember, you are worthy of love, respect, and a seat at the table. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. 3 days passed without a word from Michael. 3 days of me jumping every time the phone rang, hoping it was him calling to explain, to apologize, to tell me it was all a mistake. It never was. I sat in my living room at 9 p.m., the same spot I'd claimed every night since the call. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it ever had before. Outside, streetlights painted orange circles on my driveway, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. Normal sounds. Life going on like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The silence in my house wasn't the comfortable quiet I'd grown used to after David died. This was different. This was the sound of being erased. Of doors closing. Of conversations happening somewhere else, about someone else's life, without me. I picked up his baby picture from the side table. 6 months old, chubby cheeks, reaching for the camera with tiny fingers. I remembered that day. He'd been fussy all morning, but the second I pointed the camera at him, he smiled. Like he knew this moment mattered. When did I stop mattering? Tuesday morning, Lydia from book club called. "How are the wedding plans coming?" she asked, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. She loved weddings. Always had. My throat went dry. "Oh, you know how it is. Still working out details." "Well, don't wait too long. The good venues book up fast. Have you picked a date yet?" I stared at my kitchen calendar, the one with David's handwriting still marking doctor appointments from 3 years ago. "We're thinking spring maybe." The lie tasted bitter. I hung up and wondered how many more times I'd have to perform this dance. How many more friends would ask about centerpieces and flowers and guest lists while my son started his new life without me. By Thursday, the questions were coming from everywhere. The grocery store clerk who'd watched Michael grow up. The mailman who'd delivered his college acceptance letters. Mrs. Patterson over the fence, wanting to know if I needed help addressing invitations. Each lie got easier to tell and harder to live with. If this story hits close to home, subscribe for more because you'll want to hear where this goes next. Friday night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Michael's voice, that strange rehearsed quality. The way he'd said Sarah's name like he was reading from a script. The way he'd hung up so quickly, like he was afraid I might ask the wrong questions. Or maybe afraid he might give the wrong answers. I thought about Sarah. Pretty, quiet Sarah with her careful smiles and one-word responses. The way she'd looked at our family photos during those awkward dinners, like she was studying them, taking inventory. The way she'd asked about the farm David left to Michael. Just casual conversation, she'd said. But her eyes had gotten sharp when I mentioned the property value. At 2 a.m., staring at my bedroom ceiling, a terrible thought crept in. What if this wasn't about love at all? What if Michael hadn't just forgotten to invite me to his wedding? What if someone made sure I wasn't there? And so, one sleepless night, I opened my laptop, and what I found made my blood run cold. I'd never searched for marriage records before. Didn't even know you could do it online. But grief and suspicion make you learn things you never wanted to know. The county website looked official enough. Big blue header, government seal, search boxes that promised truth. I typed in Michael's full name with shaking fingers. Michael David Thompson. The same name on his birth certificate, his diploma, his father's will. The search button felt like pulling a trigger. There it was. Row 1, Result 1. Marriage license Thompson, Michael David and Williams, Sarah Michelle. Filed 3 days ago. Valid. Legal. Real. My hands trembled as I clicked the link. The certificate loaded slowly, line by line, like the computer was giving me time to change my mind. To close the laptop and pretend I'd never looked. But I couldn't stop now. The details were all there in black and white. His signature, neat and careful like I'd taught him in 2nd grade. Her signature, loopy and confident. The date that matched exactly what he'd told me. The courthouse address just 30 minutes from my house. 30 minutes. They'd gotten married 30 minutes away, and I might as well have been on another planet. But something was wrong. Something that made my chest tight and my mouth go dry. The witnesses. Line 12 and 13, where friends or family should have signed their names as proof they'd watched this moment happen. Instead, there were 2 names I'd never seen in my life. Patricia Vance. Thomas Mitchell. Not Michael's college friends. Not Sarah's sisters. Not the neighbors who'd watched him grow up or the co-workers who'd heard him talk about this girl for 2 years. Complete strangers. Who were Patricia Vance and Thomas Mitchell? And why had they been the only people my son wanted at his wedding? I printed the certificate on my old inkjet printer, the one that wheezed and groaned with every page. The paper came out warm, smelling like toner and secrets. I spread it flat on my kitchen table under the yellow lamp and stared at those signatures until my eyes burned. 2 witnesses. 2 people who meant nothing to Michael, nothing to me, nothing to our family. 2 people who'd watched my son get married while I sat at home, completely unaware. This wasn't just about keeping things small. This was about keeping things hidden. The clock in the hallway chimed midnight. I folded the certificate once, twice, 3 times until it fit in my palm like a love letter. But this wasn't love. This was evidence. Evidence that my son hadn't just forgotten to invite me to his wedding. He'd made sure I couldn't be there. I knew I couldn't fight this alone. That's when I called Marisol. Marisol answered on the 2nd ring, even though it was past midnight. That's the kind of friend she was. Always ready for crisis calls and middle-of-the-night emergencies. What's wrong? No hello, no small talk. She could hear the tears in my voice before I'd even said a word. Michael got married. 3 days ago. He didn't tell me until after. Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. That little shit. That made me laugh despite everything. Marisol never held back. It's what I loved about her and what made her so good at her job. 20 years as a paralegal had taught her to spot lies and cut through nonsense. She'd seen enough divorces, custody battles, and family betrayals to know when something smelled rotten. Come over, she said. Bring everything you have. 30 minutes later, I sat in her kitchen with the marriage certificate spread between us. Marisol had made coffee strong enough to wake the dead and pushed a plate of cookies toward me like I was a child who needed comforting. She studied the document with the same intensity she used to review court filings. Her finger traced each line, each signature, each official stamp. She even held it up to the light to check the paper quality. "These witnesses," she said finally, tapping the names with her fingernail. "You've never heard of them?" "Never. I thought maybe they were Sarah's friends, but she told Michael her family was small. Just her and her mom, and the mom lives in Florida." Marisol pulled out her phone and started typing. "Patricia Vance. Let me see what I can find." While she searched, I watched her face. Marisol had what David used to call a poker face, completely unreadable until she wanted you to see what she was thinking. But I'd known her for 30 years. I could see the wheels turning. She set down her phone. "Patricia Vance works for a notary service downtown. Professional witness. You pay her $50, she'll witness whatever you need." My stomach dropped. Professional witness? People use them for legal documents when they need signatures but don't want family involved. Usually because... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Usually because they're doing something the family might try to stop. The cookies turned to sawdust in my mouth. Stop? Stop what? Marisol leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. She had that look, the one that meant she'd seen this pattern before. Too many times. "Honey, somebody wanted you gone from that picture." The words hit harder than Michael's phone call had. Because Marisol didn't guess. Marisol knew. She'd spent 2 decades watching people lie, cheat, and manipulate their way through the legal system. She could smell a setup from 3 counties away. Have you ever had a friend who saw through lies before you even did? Drop their name in the comments, let's give them credit. But why? My voice came out small and broken. What did I do wrong? Marisol reached across the table and squeezed my hand. This isn't about what you did wrong. This is about control. It's always about control. She stood up and walked to her filing cabinet, the one where she kept copies of every case she'd ever worked. I've seen this before. New spouse wants complete influence over their partner. Can't have that with strong family ties getting in the way. She pulled out a thick folder and set it on the table. The question is, what else are they controlling? Marriage certificates are just the beginning. My heart started pounding. What do you mean? Marisol opened the folder and showed me pages of documents. Property transfers. Bank account changes. Power of attorney forms. All the legal paperwork that follows marriage like shadows follow sunlight. If Sarah wanted you out of the wedding, she probably wants you out of everything else too. The question is, what's she really after? If Marisol was right, this wasn't just a wedding. This was a strategy. The next morning, Marisol and I sat in front of her computer like 2 detectives working a cold case. She taught me how to search public records, how to follow paper trails, how to find the breadcrumbs people leave behind when they think no one's looking. Property records first, she said, typing Michael's name into the county database. If she's after something, it'll show up here. I watched the screen load, holding my breath. Michael owned the farm now, the one David had left him in the will. 40 acres of good land with the old farmhouse where we'd spent weekends fixing broken fences and planting vegetable gardens. David had loved that place. Called it his peace. The search results popped up, and Marisol went very still. What? I leaned closer to the screen. What is it? She pointed to the most recent entry. Quitclaim deed. Filed 5 days ago. 5 days ago. 2 days after the wedding. Michael had signed over partial ownership of the farm to Sarah Michelle Williams Thompson. Half of everything David had worked for, handed over to a woman I barely knew. That's fast, I whispered. Too fast. Marisol clicked on the document link. Normal couples wait months before combining property. Sometimes years. This was planned. The deed loaded on screen, and there it was in black and white. Michael's signature, Sarah's signature, a notary stamp that looked slightly smudged. Like someone had been in a hurry. But Marisol was frowning at something else. She'd opened another window, something technical looking with numbers and dates I didn't understand. What's that? Document metadata. Shows when files were created, modified, saved. She was typing fast now, checking timestamps and file properties. Look at this. She pointed to a line of text that meant nothing to me, but her face had gone pale. This document was created 6 days ago, before they got married. The room went cold. Before. The deed was prepared before the wedding. Before it was even legal for her to inherit anything. They planned this whole thing. My hands started shaking. I thought about the farm, about David's workshop still sitting exactly where he'd left it. His tools hung on pegboard walls, his coffee mug still on the workbench. I went there sometimes when I missed him too much. Just to sit in his chair and remember what it felt like when he was alive. Now half of it belonged to a stranger. There's more. Marisol was scrolling through another page. Joint bank account opened 4 days ago. Life insurance beneficiary changed 3 days ago. She's not just taking the property. She's taking everything. I stared at the computer screen until the words blurred together. This wasn't about love. This wasn't even about money. This was about erasure. Complete and total erasure. Sarah hadn't just wanted me gone from the wedding. She'd wanted me gone from Michael's entire life. From his future, from his assets, from any influence I might have had as his mother. How is this legal? I asked. It's legal because he's an adult and he signed the papers. But the timing. Marisol shook her head. The timing suggests fraud. Or at least coercion. Nobody moves this fast unless they're afraid of being stopped. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. I know someone who specializes in these cases. Elder financial abuse, family exploitation. He's quiet, but he's good. I'm not elderly, I protested. You're the mother being cut out. Same pattern, different age group. She found the number she was looking for. His name is Dalton. He doesn't promise fireworks, but he gets results. I looked at the computer screen one more time. At the dates that told a story of calculation and betrayal. At the signatures that proved my son had chosen her over me in every way that mattered. The farm my husband left behind wasn't just land. It was bait, and my son had swallowed it. Mr. Dalton's office smelled like old leather and fresh coffee. He was younger than I expected, maybe 45, with gray hair at his temples and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from winning battles nobody else wanted to fight. Show me what you have, he said, settling behind his desk like a doctor preparing to deliver a diagnosis. Marisol and I spread our evidence across his mahogany surface. The marriage certificate with its mystery witnesses. The property deed with its suspicious timing. The metadata printouts that proved the whole thing had been planned in advance. He studied each document without speaking, his fingers drumming silently on the wood. The only sound was the tick of an old grandfather clock in the corner and the rustle of papers as he moved from one piece of evidence to another. Finally, he looked up. Someone's been very busy. Can we stop it? The words tumbled out before I could stop them. Can we get the farm back? Mr. Dalton leaned back in his chair. We can file for an emergency freeze. Temporary injunction to halt all property transfers while we investigate the validity of these documents. My heart jumped. Really? The timing is suspicious enough to warrant judicial review. Courts don't like it when property changes hands this quickly after marriage, especially when there's evidence of pre-planning. He tapped the metadata printout. This suggests potential fraud. Marisol squeezed my hand. How long will it take? I can file the paperwork this afternoon. If the judge agrees, the freeze could be in place by tomorrow morning. He gathered the documents into a neat stack. But I need to warn you, this might get ugly. Your son won't like having his decisions questioned in court. I thought about Michael, about the boy who used to climb into my lap when thunderstorms scared him. About the teenager who'd called me from college just to hear my voice. About the man who'd married a stranger and cut me out of his life without explanation. He already made his choice, I said. Now I'm making mine. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing with a text from Mr. Dalton. Freeze approved. All property transfers halted pending review. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. It wasn't victory, not yet. But it was the first step toward reclaiming my place in my own son's life. If you believe quiet strength is more powerful than loud anger, hit that like button. I made myself breakfast for the first time since the phone call. Real breakfast, eggs and toast and coffee that actually tasted good. I sat at my kitchen table, the morning sun streaming through clean windows, and felt something I'd almost forgotten. Hope. The court papers were just paperwork. Just signatures and stamps and legal language most people wouldn't understand. But to me, they felt like armor. Like protection. Like proof that I wouldn't be erased without a fight. I was washing dishes when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. You didn't need to do this. Sarah's voice was sugar over steel, sweet and sharp at the same time. It just makes things harder for everyone. My hands went still in the soapy water. She'd called me. After weeks of silence, after cutting me out of the most important day of my son's life, she had the nerve to call me and complain. Hello, Sarah. I kept my voice calm, steady. Congratulations on your marriage. This legal stuff is unnecessary. We're family now. We should be able to work things out. Family. The word tasted bitter coming from her mouth. Family doesn't erase you from wedding photos. Family doesn't forge documents before the marriage is even legal. You're right, I said. Family should work things out. That's why I'm confused about why you didn't include me in the wedding planning. Silence on the line. I could practically hear her scrambling for an explanation. We wanted something small. Small enough for professional witnesses, but too small for the groom's mother. Another pause. Longer this time. When she spoke again, the sugar was gone from her voice. What do you want? I want my son back. I want to understand why documents were prepared before your marriage was legal. I want to know why you're in such a hurry to take everything my husband worked for. I'm not taking anything. Michael gave. Michael was coached. The words came out harder than I intended, but they were true. I know my son. I know when he's being manipulated. The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled too tight. Finally she spoke, and her voice was pure ice. You're making a mistake. No, I said, calm as morning coffee. I didn't erase myself from my son's life. You did that. I'm just reclaiming my space. The line went dead. But the freeze was only the beginning, because she called me directly. The courthouse looked smaller than I expected. Brown brick, tall windows, American flag snapping in the morning breeze. I'd driven past it thousands of times, but never imagined I'd be walking through those doors to fight for my own family. Mr. Dalton met me in the lobby, looking professional in his navy suit and carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than my car. You ready for this? No. I wasn't ready to sit in a room and listen to lawyers argue about whether my son had the right to erase me from his life. I wasn't ready to see Michael sitting on the other side of the aisle, avoiding my eyes like a stranger. But I nodded anyway. Let's do this. The courtroom was smaller than the ones on TV. Maybe 20 wooden pews, a judge's bench that looked like it belonged in a church, fluorescent lights that hummed quietly overhead. Sarah sat in the front row wearing a black dress and the kind of neutral expression she'd perfected during those awkward family dinners. Michael sat beside her in a suit I'd never seen before. He looked older somehow. Tired. When I walked in, he glanced up for just a second, then stared at his hands like they held the secrets of the universe. Judge Morrison was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses that she peered over when she wanted to make a point. She'd reviewed our case file and didn't look impressed with what she'd found. "This is a motion for emergency injunction," she said, shuffling through papers. "Petitioner alleges fraudulent property transfer following suspicious marriage circumstances." Sarah's lawyer stood up, some expensive suit from downtown who probably charged more per hour than I made in a week. "Your Honor, this is simply a family dispute. My clients followed all legal procedures." Legal procedures that involved professional witnesses instead of family members? Judge Morrison's eyebrows went up. "And property documents prepared before the marriage was legally recognized?" I watched the lawyer's face change. He'd probably thought this would be easy. Grieving mother, can't accept her son's marriage, case dismissed. But judges see patterns. They recognize the difference between grief and fraud. Mr. Dalton stood up with our evidence folder. "Your Honor, the timeline suggests deliberate manipulation. Documents created before legal authority existed. Witnesses with no personal connection to either party. Property transfers executed with unusual speed." The judge took the folder and studied our printouts. The metadata reports, the witness information, the deed with its smudged notary stamp. Everything Marisol and I had discovered in her kitchen over coffee and determination. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Morrison said, looking directly at Michael. "Did you understand the full implications of these property transfers when you signed them?" Michael shifted in his seat. "Yes, ma'am. Sarah and I discussed." "When did you discuss them? Before or after your marriage?" Silence. Michael's lawyer whispered something in his ear, but he was already turning red. The same way he used to when I caught him in a lie as a kid. "Before," he admitted quietly. "Before you had legal authority to transfer marital property?" The expensive lawyer jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor. My client was free to make plans." "Plans, yes. Legal documents, no." Judge Morrison set down the papers and looked directly at Sarah. "Mrs. Thompson, what was your role in preparing these documents?" For the first time, Sarah's perfect composure cracked. Just a little. A flicker of something that might have been panic. We wanted to make sure everything was in order for our future together. By excluding the groom's family from the wedding and rushing through property transfers? Judge Morrison's voice was dry as desert wind. "That's an interesting approach to family planning. Would you forgive a child who betrayed you like this? Comment your thoughts. I want to hear them." The rest of the hearing was legal language and procedural arguments, but the real verdict was written on everyone's faces. Sarah's lawyer kept checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be. Michael kept staring at the floor. Sarah's mask of calm confidence had slipped completely. When Judge Morrison announced her decision, emergency freeze sustained pending full investigation, Sarah's face went white. "All property transfers are suspended until this court can determine their validity," the judge said. "Discovery phase will begin immediately." As we filed out of the courtroom, I heard Sarah hiss something to Michael under her breath. Something that made his shoulders slump like he was carrying the weight of the world. I didn't try to talk to him. Didn't try to catch his eye or mouth the words, "I love you," across the courtroom divide. There would be time for that later, when the truth had finished its work. And in that moment, I knew, justice doesn't need to roar. It just needs to be steady. 3 weeks later, the settlement conference felt like a funeral. Same courthouse, same brown brick and humming fluorescents, but the energy had changed. The fight had gone out of everyone except the lawyers, who still charged by the hour whether we were winning or losing. Sarah sat across the conference table looking like she'd aged 5 years in 3 weeks. The discovery phase had not been kind to her. Bank records showing large cash deposits right before the wedding. Phone records proving she'd contacted the professional witnesses weeks in advance. Email trails discussing asset protection and family exclusion strategies. Michael barely looked human. Dark circles under his eyes, hollow cheeks, hands that shook when he reached for his water glass. Whatever spell Sarah had cast over him was breaking, and he didn't like what he was seeing underneath. "My clients are prepared to offer a compromise," Sarah's lawyer announced, sliding papers across the table like he was dealing cards in a poker game nobody wanted to play. Mr. Dalton read through the terms without expression. "They're offering to reverse the property deed in exchange for dismissal of fraud charges." I looked at Sarah, sitting there in another expensive dress, playing with her wedding ring like it might disappear if she stopped touching it. This was the woman who'd convinced my son to erase me from the most important day of his life. The woman who'd planned to steal everything my husband had worked for. "What about the marriage?" I asked quietly. Sarah's head snapped up. "What about it? Was any of it real? Or was it all just business?" For a moment, just a moment, I saw something human in her eyes. Something that might have been shame or regret, or the recognition that she'd gone too far and lost too much. "I loved him," she said, and her voice cracked on the words. "But you loved his inheritance more." She didn't answer. Couldn't answer. The evidence spoke louder than any words she might have offered. Michael finally looked up from his hands. "Mom, don't." I held up my hand, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "Don't apologize. Don't explain. Don't make excuses. Just decide what kind of man you want to be." He started crying then. Not the quiet tears of a grown man trying to maintain dignity, but the broken sobs of a little boy who'd lost his way and couldn't find his way home. Sarah reached for his hand, but he pulled away. The movement was small but final. Like a door closing. "I accept the settlement," I told Mr. Dalton. The paperwork took another hour. Signatures and stamps and legal language that translated to. The farm stayed in Michael's name alone, Sarah got nothing, and the fraud charges disappeared into legal limbo where everyone could pretend they'd never existed. As we gathered our papers and prepared to leave, Michael caught up with me in the hallway. "Mom, his voice broke. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I looked at my son, really looked at him. The boy I'd raised, the man I'd been proud of, the stranger who'd cut me out of his life for a woman who'd never loved him at all. "I know you are," I said. "But sorry doesn't fix this. Can we try? To fix it, I mean." I thought about forgiveness, about bridges burned and trust broken. About the difference between loving someone and letting them back into your life. "Maybe," I said finally. "But not today." It wasn't a happy ending. It wasn't even a complete ending. It was just an ending. But sometimes that's enough. Even then, I had to decide, would I let this betrayal erase me as a mother? The divorce papers arrived 6 weeks later. Michael served Sarah on a Tuesday morning, and by Thursday she was gone. Moved out of the apartment they'd shared, disappeared from social media, vanished like smoke in the wind. I heard about it from Mrs. Patterson, who heard it from her sister, who worked at the courthouse. Small towns don't keep secrets long, especially when those secrets involve fraud and betrayal and families tearing apart in public. "How's Michael doing?" she asked over the fence, the same fence where she'd asked about wedding plans that would never happen. "He's figuring things out," I said, which was true enough. He was living in the farmhouse now, David's old place with the workshop and the vegetable garden and the ghosts of better times. He'd called me twice since the settlement. Short conversations, careful words, both of us walking on glass around the edges of what had happened. He'd invited me for coffee. I'd said maybe later. He'd asked if I was angry. I'd said I was working on it. The truth was more complicated than anger. I was sad, disappointed, confused about how to love someone who'd hurt me so deeply, proud of myself for fighting back, but tired from the battle. Recovery isn't a straight line. Some days I felt strong, victorious, like a woman who'd faced down manipulation and won. Other days I felt hollow, wondering if fighting for my place in Michael's life had been worth the cost. The farm deed sat in my safe deposit box now, properly filed and legally protected. David's workshop stayed exactly as he'd left it. The vegetable garden grew wild without anyone to tend it. It was a strange kind of victory. No champagne, no celebration, no triumphant music swelling in the background. Just quiet relief and the knowledge that I'd stood up for myself when it mattered most. Some nights I'd drive past the farmhouse and see lights in the windows. Michael's truck in the driveway, smoke coming from the chimney. A life continuing without me, but at least continuing honestly now. I'd think about stopping. About knocking on the door and asking if he wanted company. About trying to bridge the gap that Sarah had created and that our legal battle had widened. But I wasn't ready yet. Maybe I never would be. The lesson I carried, the one I'd learned in courtrooms and conference rooms and sleepless nights staring at marriage certificates, was this: sometimes protecting yourself means letting go of the people you love most. Even when they're your own children. Even when it breaks your heart. The phone rang as I was getting ready for bed, 3 months after the settlement. Michael's number on the caller ID, the same number I'd been ignoring for weeks. This time, I answered. "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded different. Older. Sadder. Real in a way it hadn't been during those awful weeks when Sarah was pulling his strings. "Hi, sweetheart." We talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. The weather, the farm, the vegetables growing wild in David's garden. Neither of us mentioned Sarah or the wedding or the legal battles that had torn our family apart. When he asked if he could come over for dinner next week, I almost said yes. The word was right there on my tongue, ready to tumble out and start the long process of rebuilding what we'd lost. Instead, I said, "Let me think about it." "Okay," he said, and I could hear the disappointment in his voice. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too," I said, because that had never been in question. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and wondered if I was being too stubborn, too proud, too unwilling to forgive. But forgiveness wasn't the issue. Trust was. And trust, once broken, takes time to heal. But even then, I had to decide, would I let this betrayal erase me as a mother? 6 months after the settlement, I finally said yes to dinner. Michael showed up at my door on a Sunday evening with flowers from the grocery store and the kind of nervous smile he used to wear on the first day of school. He'd lost weight, gotten some gray in his hair, developed lines around his eyes that made him look more like his father than ever before. "Thank you," he said as I let him in, and we both knew he wasn't just talking about dinner. We ate at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd spread out marriage certificates and property deeds and evidence of betrayal. But tonight it held pot roast and mashed potatoes and the careful conversation of two people trying to find their way back to each other. He told me about the farm, about fixing the fence posts and replanting David's vegetable garden, about the divorce being finalized and Sarah moving to California, about therapy sessions and long nights staring at the ceiling, wondering how he'd gotten so lost. I told him about the settlement money I donated to legal aid, about Marisol's new job, about learning to trust my own instincts again, about the difference between forgiving and forgetting. We didn't talk about the wedding that wasn't. We didn't rehash the betrayal or the court battles or the months of silence that had stretched between us like a canyon. Some wounds need air to heal, but others need to be left alone. After dinner, he helped me wash dishes. Standing side by side at the sink, our hands bumping in the soapy water, felt like the most natural thing in the world. Like muscle memory. Like coming home. "I know I can't undo what happened," he said as we dried the last plate. "No," I agreed. "You can't. But maybe we can build something new? Something better." I looked at my son, really looked at him. The boy who'd climbed into my lap during thunderstorms had grown into a man who'd made terrible choices and paid terrible prices. But he was still my son. Still the child I'd carried and nursed and worried over and loved beyond reason. "Maybe," I said. "But it'll take time." "I have time," he said simply. He stayed until 10, helping me with crossword puzzles and showing me pictures of the garden on his phone. When he left, he hugged me at the door, the first time he'd touched me since before the wedding that wasn't. "See you next Sunday?" he asked hopefully. "We'll see," I said, but I was already planning what to cook. The next morning, I drove out to the cemetery where David was buried. His headstone was simple gray granite with his name and dates and the words "beloved husband and father." I sat on the bench nearby and told him about dinner, about Michael's apology, about the long road ahead. "He's finding his way back," I said to the headstone, to the wind, to the memory of the man who'd loved us both. "It's going to take time, but I think he's finding his way back." A cardinal landed on David's headstone, bright red against the gray stone. Cardinals were his favorite birds. He used to say they were good luck, signs that everything would work out in the end. I chose to believe him. The lesson I carry now, the one I share with anyone willing to listen, isn't about forgiveness or revenge or legal victories. It's about something simpler and harder, the courage to stay true to yourself when the people you love try to erase you. Because in the end, you teach people how to treat you. Not by what you say, but by what you accept. I didn't accept being erased. I fought back with truth and patience and quiet strength. I stood up for myself without losing my soul in the process. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't come with fireworks or headlines. Sometimes it's just the steady knowledge that you didn't let them make you disappear. My son called me 3 months ago and said, "We got married yesterday." But what he didn't know then, what he's learning now, is that I am still here. Today, tomorrow, and always. Not as the mother who could be erased, but as the woman who refused to disappear. That's a different kind of love. A stronger kind. The kind that survives betrayal and builds bridges from ashes. The kind that lasts. If this story moved you, subscribe so you never miss another. Hit that notification bell because next week I'm sharing another story of family betrayal and quiet victory that will leave you speechless. Share this with someone who needs to hear that the truth always finds its way, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Your story could inspire someone else to find their own strength. Thank you for being part of this family, and remember, you are never as powerless as someone wants you to believe.